My mind kept repeating a single thought. He had taken from me my innocence, my youth, my heart, everything. So I took from him the only thing I could.
Really, nobody's gonna crack open a book.
They're in there.
Why do they lock this?
So we don't steal them.
Are you for the engineering club?
I'd like to enter this.
The 5th annual underwater robotics competition.
So you want to go up against the best tech schools in the country?
It says they scout for internships and jobs.
You guys got some ground to make up. The other teams will have more money than you.
So you're still short $432.54.
And my man ate a couple ice creams on the way in.
Can I have an ice cream?
Too late. I already wrote the check. Okay, we gotta find cheap, creative ways to build this thing.
How do we fix it?
We gotta stop this leak.
What's small and really absorbent.
Next case.
City of Atlanta versus Mabel Simmons.
Hey, Cora. Hey, Brown. If the Lord get me out of this, I'm going by the church.
You better mean it, too.
I'm going by the church.
You better mean it.
I mean it. Hey, Jared. Oh, Carol, your hair is so pretty. Who doing your hair? Lord have mercy. How you doing?
Mabel Simmons, you come before me more than you go to the doctor for a checkup.
Listen, I done changed my life. You ain't got to say nothing. I am living for the Lord. I am
sweet.
living for the Lord. I am living for the Lord.
Mabel-
Hallelujah. I feel him down in my spirit. You know, as I think about the goodness of Jesus and all that he has done for me, my soul cries out, hallelujah. Thank God for saving me.
You finished?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Academy's Visiting Artists Film Series FilmAid edition for film editing. I'm Dodie Dorn here in Los Angeles. I'm a governor of the Academy and the editor's branch. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Maisie Hoy, who I've known for over 40 years, a long time. And I'm very proud and humbled to be able to introduce her to you, the amazing Maisie Hoy.
Thank you, Dodie. I mean, people don't know that Dodie herself is a well-respected editor in her own right. So she has a great body of work. So get onto the web and check out her resume. Anyways, hi to everyone. My name is Maisie Hoy. I'm a film editor and I live in Los Angeles as well. And I guess where do we start, Dodie, from the beginning?
Yeah, first, I just want to thank you so much for doing this. It really means a lot to the students, I know, and other people out there who are watching this. So it's really great that you're willing to share your time and your experiences. And I would just love to know how you first got started in the film industry.
Well, I started out as an actress, you know, living in Vancouver. And at a very, very young age, this is very strange. I think as far back as I can remember, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, this is what I wanted to do, which is crazy because, you know, where I grew up with very traditional parents, being Chinese and very, very old school, that was the furthest thing from their minds of what I should be doing. And so with that in the back of my mind, it just sort of, you know, to please my family, I told them I wanted to be a nurse. But when I graduated, I said, okay, I don't know how I'm going to get into the film business, but I'll go and study to be a dietitian. And then in my spare time, I could find acting work. And so one day I'm in the cafeteria of this college and I see all these students having fun. They were just having a great time. So I approached them and I said, can I ask you what classes you guys are in or what's your major? And they go, theater arts. So I go, oh, wow, that's great. I said, I didn't even know they had a theater arts program here. And I said, well, how do I get in it? And they said, well, first of all, you go to your counselor and ask to be transferred. I said, okay, great. So I head off to the counselor's office. And you got to understand that Vancouver is a very provincial kind of city. In fact, very stoic, very English. So I walked into the counselor's office and there's a woman sitting behind the desk, gray hair with a big bun. She was really, really nice. And I said to her, I said, look, I want to transfer out of the dietitian program and get into the theater arts program. And she kind of looked at me and said, well, are you sure this is what you want? I said, yeah, this is something I've dreamed of doing all my life. And she goes, you know, there's not going to be a lot of work for somebody like you. And I looked at her and I go, well, it doesn't matter. I said, this is what I want to do. So can you please sign my transfer, sign the transfer for me to get to the theater program. So she signed it. And off I went to the basement of this college. And I walked in and there was this very English looking gentleman who ran the program. And it was Tony Holland. And he had worked at the Bristol Old Vic in London. And now he was living in Vancouver and he was head of this theater program. So I gave him the transfer note and he looked at the transfer note. He looked up at me a couple times and he goes, why do you want to do this? And I go, well, I want to be an actress. And he said this basically the same thing. He goes, you know, there's not a lot of work for somebody like you. I looked at him, I go, just let me in the class. You don't even have to talk to me. You don't have to bother me. Just let me in the class. And so, you know, so he did. And it's interesting because many years later, you know, I became good friends with his wife. And the wife, her name was Gusta. And she said to me, she says, you know, he came home that day and he said, can you believe it? There's this Chinese woman that wants to be an actress. And besides, she's not that pretty. And so anyways, I always used this against him because when I'd see him after I graduated and came to Hollywood and made a career of myself, he would always look at me sheepishly and say, I'm really, really sorry about what I said to you. I said, you know what? What that did was it's motivated me to create my own program or find my own way. So once again, I'm sitting, you know, in my friend's office, apartment, and she said, you know, they're casting this movie in town. I go, well, what? Well, it's Robert Altman. He's doing a movie called McCabe and Mrs. Miller. And so she said, you know what, you should see if you can get on that. And so then at the time, I met somebody who at that time had a book of actors. And I got involved in that. You know, they take your picture, they put it in this book and they give it to the casting directors. And so one day I get this phone call from somebody called Graham Clifford. Now, Graham now is a director, but he was the casting director. So he brought me in and we sat and we talked a lot. And so then I sort of like left it. And he goes, well, you know, Bob is going to be in town in about a month. So I'm going to keep you in mind. So just stay in touch. And so I get a phone call from Robert Altman's office. And Graham said, well, you know, Bob wants to meet you. And so I said, okay. So at that time I didn't have a car, but I took a bus, which took about an hour to get to where Bob was. And anyways, I walked in and I think he was sick. I mean, he was laying around on a couch and he looked up at me. He goes, I don't stand for whores. And I go, at that point, I knew I got the job because in McCabe and Mrs. Miller, they had the only women's parts in that movie were prostitutes. And so that's how I met Robert Altman. And so from that point on, I was in that movie. And when I finished the movie, I couldn't get any work, I think I got a job on a CBC film, a series, and I played a receptionist. And so that was about it. They weren't casting Asian women. And this is before Vancouver became like the place to shoot movies and television shows, because when I left, they created an incentive. So, the nickname for Vancouver is Hollywood North. So after being unemployed for a while, I'd take odd jobs just so that, pay the rent and things like that. And so I finally said to, once again, my friend Joan in the basement of her apartment, I said, you know what, I got to get out of here, because if anybody's ever been to Vancouver, they call Vancouver part of the Northwest rainforest. So it rains 360 days out of 365 days. And I said, I got to get out of here. I can't stand this rain anymore. So she said, have you thought about writing to Robert Altman? And I go, oh, that's an idea. So I wrote to him, never heard back. And then I read in the trades that he was doing this picture called California Split, right? I had no idea what it was. So I just made a random phone call, to him in California. And I reintroduced myself to him. And I said, you know what, I'd like to come to California, to Los Angeles, and just sort of shadow you, because I want to be a director. And he said to me, he goes, do you play poker? And I go, well, I can learn. Sort of. Yeah, I kind of know how to play poker. And he goes, okay, be here January 13th. I swear to God, within a week, I was gone. And I tell people this story because my parents, being immigrants, had very little English, had understood very little English. So I said to my mother, on the day I was leaving, I mean, they sort of had an idea I was up to something. And so I left. I only knew two people, Robert Altman and a kid I went to church with. I knew he was going to Arts Center, and I knew I had a place to stay for a week. So I had my sleeping bag and my backpack, and I left. And I'll tell you, the weirdest thing that happened was the minute I landed in Los Angeles, I knew this was where I belonged.
That's great. That's fantastic.
And so, your feet hit the ground, and it was like, okay, this is where you're supposed to be.
I love that. I love that. That was just what I would call a master class in moxie. Because you just took these small scraps or little strings of opportunities and turned them into your life, and it's a fantastic story. I love it. And I
think I was too dumb to know that that's not what you do. Call up a director, like that. But yeah, it was interesting because when I got on the set, I looked around and all these different departments, right? And I kind of made a plan in my head, and I go, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm in a situation where I could learn a lot, from these different people. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to create my own Robert Altman film school. So every day I would spend, because they would see me on the set. The crew would see me on the set, and they always wondered, who is this person? What is she doing here? And so when I explained to them that I knew Bob and I was in his movie, and it was an interesting dynamic, because then they looked at me in a different way. They were very helpful. Everybody on the crew was very helpful. And I think that I was protected by knowing him. So nobody treated me badly, even though the guys were trying to hit on me. And that was like, part of the environment. And so I decided, okay, let's see, today I'm going to spend the day with the sound people. And that was with Jimmy Webb and Chris McLaughlin. And at that time, he was just creating the 8-track sound. So I would sit with them and ask them questions. They were very helpful. They didn't say, you know, beat it, kid. And then the next day I would spend it with the electrical department where I met my future husband. I didn't know this, and then the next day I would hang out with the camera people and the script supervisor and the wardrobe people, because, you know, I could sew. And I met this lovely wardrobe man. His name was Huey, and he had been a wardrobe person for Fred Astaire and Robert Wagner. And he took a liking to me. He was an older gentleman, and he'd come to work in a 3-piece suit and a fedora. And so I think he must have been like 70. And so he whispered to me, he goes, okay, this is what you got to do, kid. When they call for wardrobe or they call Huey, you go, here. So you replace me. So you run up and you ask them, what do you need? And then they'll say, oh, go to Elliot's trailer and grab whatever. And so that's what you do. So you run and you get the clothes and you come back and you give it to them. And so I did that on the set. And of course, you know, as things would happen, they went to Reno, Nevada to shoot some, you know, scenes for the casino. And the script supervisor was pregnant. And I have to backtrack, because when I was on the set of California Split, there was one day Alan Rudolph, who was the second AD, assistant director, came up to me and he goes, do you know how to hold script? I go, why? He goes, well, Carol's sick. She, you know, has got morning sickness real bad. She says, well, do you know how to hold script? I go, yeah. And that was the truth, because we had video classes at the college and I knew that, you know, you'd time the stuff and then that was about it. So I go, yeah, so give me the script. And here I was holding a script, and I worked for like 2 days as a script supervisor on this movie. And so anyways, at that time, Bob looked at me like second day or something. He looked at me and goes, you know, you actually do that pretty well. I go, oh, thanks. And then from that point on, when we went to Reno, I also helped with the script supervising. So from that point on, I just sort of kept hanging out, you know, at his office, because I had nowhere else to go, you know, and these were really, you know, nice people. They were fun.
Can you give us a really brief description of what a script supervisor does? Because a lot of people, they don't put those two words together and have any idea what it means. Script supervisor.
Well, the script supervisor take notes. She sits next to the camera. Well, now they're in Video Village, but she's the closest person to the director because she has to take care of the continuity, meaning from scene to scene. If somebody's wearing a hat in one scene and the next scene, they need to be wearing the hat. They can't not be wearing the hat because it needs to be consistent. She also takes care of the script in terms of the timing. She writes down the lens that's used, you know, in the filming. She makes notes, whether it's a visual effect that they're shooting or a plate. She also hands, when she's done with the day, she gives the editors a log of what was shot and the script pages of what was shot that day. And so that's my guide to what I'd be seeing in terms of dailies. And dailies, that's a word we use for scenes that was shot the day before. And so when I get the dailies the next day, that's what it is. Is that clear enough?
Yeah, no,
Dodie?
that's great. Yeah, because a lot of people don't understand that the script supervisor is really the connection for us, especially these days, since we don't watch dailies together anymore on film. You're getting a lot of information from the set to your editing room through the script supervisor's notes. So a lot of times I develop a relationship with the script supervisor for that reason, so that I can get the information. And I just think it's interesting. Also, the script supervisor makes sure that all the words in the script are said at least in one take.
Right.
So
and also the sound report, right? And the sound is very, very important to us. Maybe on the set, most of them, they don't care, And so the script supervisor is also my go-between to talk to the director and to the DP, the director of photography, the cinematographer, because if something goes wrong on the set, or you have dailies that are confusing, or the camera move is kind of weird in terms of it being shaky, or what really bothers me is when an operator is shooting a close-up on an actor and he reframes in the middle of a shot. And you go, how am I going to use that? And so instead of going to the producer, which is a really bad no-no, I'd go to the script supervisor. Unless I've been on the set, when I was working with Tyler, I would go to the set the first week of shooting. And part of it was to sit with him, because when he first started, he was a stage director. And so I would sit with him and I'd look at framing, and I, kind of talk to him a little bit about the scene, or I'd just sit and watch. And I develop a relationship with the cinematographer, the sound people, the wardrobe people, the makeup people. So if anything went wrong after I left, I could make a phone call to the DP and go, hey, you know what? I just want to give you a heads up. Here's what your camera guy's doing. I said, can you tell him not to do that? So that he then knows that I'm not threatening him or causing him problems, with the producer, or even going to the director, because the director has a lot on their minds. And the last thing they want to hear is, okay, camera guy is not doing his job. But on one occasion, this happened. That when I was working with Tyler on Daddy's Little Girls, we had a lot of out of focus shots. And he called me up. He goes, what is going on? And I go, well, I'll talk to the cameraman and see what's going on with these guys. And they said, well, the operator said the actor's moving too much in the scene. I go, that's their job, to figure out focus. If they're moving back and forth. I said, that's not a great excuse. So from that point on, Tyler would always ask me, he goes, I want you to tell me what's in focus and what is out of focus.
Well, can I go back a little bit and ask you about what the transition was like going from acting to post-production, and what prompted it? You're kind of in the middle of answering that, but then also how your acting informed your craft as an editor anyway, in general.
Well, the transition from acting to post-production and eventually to editing happened when I was working with Robert Altman. I became a PA on Nashville, and I was PA to the wardrobe department. And from after we finished with Nashville, Bob decided that he wanted to do Buffalo Bill and the Indians. And it happened that Buffalo Bill and the Indians was a period piece. It was set in the 1880s. And so they needed somebody to do research on that time period, for the production design, for the wardrobe, for the dialogue, and just sort of events that were happening during the 1880s. And so he kind of looked at me and he basically said, okay, you go do the research. And I, once again, sitting in the room when it all happened. And so I started doing the research on Buffalo Bill and the Indians. And then I went on location with them and was also the PA to the wardrobe department. And after we finished shooting, when we got back to Los Angeles, you know, I knew the editors from all the other movies that Bob did. And so one day I'm walking down the hallway, and back in the day of film, we had trim bins. We had where you put the film, you put the film on hooks, you'd mark it, and it all had to go back into rolls so that the editor, when they put it up on the chem or the Steenbeck, that everything was in sync. And so there must have been 20, you know, of these bins. And I'm walking down the hall and I see this two pair of legs, you know, it was like a cartoon inside this bin. And you see all this film flying out, which was really another big no-no, because you can't have any scratches on film. And as an assistant, if you tear film, then you'd have to get a reprint, which meant it would cost the company more money. So I tapped this guy and I knew who it was. And I go, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I'm looking for 2 frames. Now, we're on electronic editing equipment now. 2 frames is nothing, you know, but back in the day, when you've got 20 bins of film and you got to look for the 2 frames, you need somebody to help you." So I looked at him, I go, "Well, it looks like you need help." He goes, "Yes, we need an apprentice. We need somebody to put this stuff together." And I go, "Well, I think I can do it." He goes, "Yeah, you could most definitely do it." I said, "So," he goes, "Well, you got to go ask Bob." I go, "Oh God." Okay, so I walked across the way, and at that time, Robert Altman to me was like 7 feet tall. In reality, he was probably 6'1". Okay, I'm 5'1". And so walk in, and he's pacing, and I was trying to test what mood he was in. And so anyways, I go, "Okay, fine. You know, what is he going to say? No." So I walked up, opened the door and walked in, and I go, "Bob, you know, the editors need help, you know, in reconstituting the film." And I says, I think I can do it. You know, they need an apprentice. And he looked down at me, he goes, "This isn't a film school, you know." And I go, well, I know that, but you know what? They still need help. And he kind of looked at me, he goes, "Okay, if it's okay with the guys, it's okay with me." And I go, "It's okay with the guys." And man, I ran out of that place so fast before he changed his mind. So that's how I got into editing. I became an assistant on Buffalo Bill because he shot like 1 million feet of film. So it had to be organized. They had 3 editors on the show. And so that's basically how I got into editing. And from that, I got a huge, you know, lesson in post-production, how a film is shot. And in my background, I've been so fortunate, you know, growing up in this business, seeing amazing dailies, knowing where, like working with a director that knows exactly where to put the camera. So when I'm working now, you just get this feeling, it's ingrained in my bones that I know when it's a good shot or when it just like, that just doesn't feel, you know, feel right, because I, you know, sat in the room when Bob would come in and give notes to the editors. And, you know, I'd sit there and I'd listen to what he had to say. And I would kind of like, you know, look at the film and kind of try to maybe, you know, second guess what he was going to say. And so that's how I got into post-production. And the reason why I decided that I wanted to be in editing was, you know, because acting, I didn't want to go out for the one line when I was 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, you know. And I said, you know, if I became an editor, they couldn't judge me on the way I looked. They would judge me on my resume, you know, my body of work. And if they did, then, well, it's too bad for them. You know, I don't particularly want to work with, you know, people like that. And so in editing a film, I think that the acting helped me because I would find the truth of the character. I mean, you know, when you're acting, you got to find the motivation, you got to figure out their backstory. And so as an editor, I try to put myself in as a character.
Yeah, that's right. All the little moments you're always looking for, but that's a great lead into this other question of how you find the best moments in and out of a scene.
Well, I think you sit and you watch, you know, I guess with an actor's eye and an editor's eye, you just listen, you know, to the performance, and you watch the behavior of the character. And this is where, leaving the scene, I know about timing, because that's where my improv background comes in. Because when you're on the stage and you're just sort of winging it, and you have this feeling like, oh my God, I think I'm dying in this scene, then somebody comes in and saves you. And so having learned that and having participated in improvs, you just get a feeling. So I think that as editors, there's a lot of times when, you know, a director will say, well, why did you pick that take? And I go, well, because it felt right. Right.
Absolutely.
Because basically you're not going to say, well, I'm discounting your feelings, because that's a whole other you know, conversation. But you just feel the scene. And for any of the students wanting to get into editing, you have to trust your instincts, you know, and that's
another great lead into this question of if a director is especially attached to one shot or sequence and you believe it kills the momentum of the film at large, how do you have that conversation? You were touching on it right there, trusting your instincts.
Well, you have a very gingerly conversation because their egos are about, you know, or about this big. What I do is I propose it. I'll say, well, you know what, I don't think we need this shot, or I feel it's slowing, you know, the momentum. And they go like, no, I don't think so. And you go, okay, you leave it alone, we'll work on the other scenes. And you come back and then you go, you know what, I still feel that it's stopping, you know, the movie. And they'll kind of look at me and I go, okay, I'm dropping it. You know, I'm not going to revisit this until the very end. And so as we're being brutal with putting our movie in shape, that's when we become ruthless. And so ruthless in a way you're servicing the film, not ruthless because the editor has an ego that you know, okay, 2 points for him and 2 for me. So now we're at a draw. And so I bring it back up and I go, you know, I've been watching it and you know, the last 3 cuts, I said, it's stopping the scene and stopping the momentum of the movie. And they'll finally go, yeah, all right, you know, take it out. Or if there is a scene that is really in between 2 other scenes, right? And you go, you know, we don't need this scene. We already know what's going to happen. The dialogue is giving us, you know, foreshadowing everything. So we don't need it. And they'll kind of look at me and I go, here's what you do. Put it in your next movie. Get that little card and put it in your next movie. And I think I do it with humor because, you know, our job is to facilitate their vision, and the ego is creating the best film we can together and being a good collaborator. And then there are maybe once in a while, there are editors directors that are writers, you know. So when I'm interviewing with the director who's also a writer, and my question is, are you going to be holding on to things that you've written? Oh, no, I'm really good with that. And then when you get down to it, it's like, no, we really need that scene. And I'd look at them, I go, what did you tell me in that first interview? You know? And so it is sitting and watching, you know, the movie a lot. And that's when people ask is, well, don't you get bored watching the scene over and over? And I go, well, no, because I'm looking at different things. So I don't know about you, Dodie, but we're always looking at the whole frame. You know, it isn't just the performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm hearing is this really intimate relationship that you're developing with your directors. So you have those conversations in the interview, and then you actually are bringing it back when you're working together. And I think that's fantastic. So I have a few more questions that these come from some of the students in Kenya. If you have any interaction with them on the color grading with the director and the finishing product, and how that works, and if you want to say anything about that, and how it affects the overall emotion of the film.
Well, I think that, you know, our job, we start our job when they first start shooting, though I wish that we started sooner, because I think we have a lot of input into, you know, scenes and the overall look, or the sound that's involved. So I'll give you sort of a timeline, and that'll explain that question. So editors start on the first day of shooting, and then they finish shooting. We present our cut to the director. The director looks at it, and then at that time we start having discussions about the sound of a scene, the overall look of the movie. And so once he's happy with his cut and we're locking the picture, I stay on to supervise the color correction, the sound of the movie. We're on the mix, the music. We talk to the composer, and we're the keeper of how it looks. You know, we speak for the director. I mean, when I'm in a situation when I'm working with Tyler, he leaves after his cut, and I take over and I do all of the color correction. I'm on the stage, listening to the sound, making sure it's what he wants, and talking to the composer of the music, where it should be cued. We have sessions, what we call spotting sessions, meaning the sound effects supervisor comes into my room along with the visual effects supervisor, and the music supervisor and the composer. So we sit and we run through the movie, and we stop and go, and the composer would say, or I would say, you know, Tyler wants music in here, or they just get a feel of it. And we're talking through this whole process, and the sound supervisor gets to see the whole movie, so he has an idea of what it should sound like in certain scenes. And then we go off and we do our jobs, and the composer invites me to listen to the score. And I tell people, look, you know what? I'm here representing Tyler, and I'm here representing any of the directors I've worked with. I said, so if I ask you to do something and you think it's not something you want to do, I said, well, you know, first of all, let me know and we talk about it. But a bottom line is, if it gets screwed up, then I'll take the responsibility. I'm not going to put it on you. But, you know, we're here to do a job together. And so, which leads me in terms of the sound and the color of the picture. When we were doing the Joy Luck Club, if you examine that, if you look at that movie closely, there are no dissolves or fade outs in that entire movie, in that 2 hour and 15-minute movie. And the reason for that was when I was talking to Wayne Wang, the director, I said, how are we going to deal with transitions? I said, I'm not a fan of dissolves or fade outs, but if you want them, we're going to do it. And he goes, well, we're going to do an A/B on it, which means they do it in the lab. You don't get to see it, before it goes to the lab. And I said to him, I go, well, that's scary. I said, I don't like that because I don't get to see how the dissolve works, because sometimes you put a dissolve in and you go, oh my God, you got to start noodling with it. But because they do it in the lab, it's done. You can't undo it unless you go back and redo that thing. So I said to Wayne, he and I decided, well, how about this? Why don't we do sound effects? So in that movie, the 4 women were different elements. One was water, one was fire, one was wood, one was wind. And so especially the scene where Lindo, the woman that gets married off to this young boy, when she decides to get out of this arranged marriage, at the end, when she tells her mother-in-law that the maid is actually carrying her son's baby, and that's how she got out of that, out of that marriage. And so the line goes, well, Yun Tai Tai got her grandson and I got a one-way ticket to Shanghai. And so in that scene, when you hear that narration, the narration bridges us into the past present. And on top of that, you hear the sound of a train crossing that scene, and it morphs into cable car, which is now we're in San Francisco. Right?
That's great. I love that. I love that. So you're using audio as your transition instead of visual. And if it's effective and it's doing all that, then it brings the audience in, or like I like to say, the sound sucks you into the next scene.
Right. And we did it throughout the whole movie, on subliminal level. And it worked, really well in that movie. And which brings me to, I think there was a question about, are there things that we create that are not in the script, to help forward the movie? And a scene, once again, in the Joy Luck Club, where the scene is with the same woman, Ying Ying, and her daughter living in this crooked house. And so she's walking around and her whole thing is, I'm like a tiger on a prowl. So Wayne comes into my cutting room and he had this look on his face. I go, what's going on? And he goes, well, I've been accused of this and I guess I'll be accused of it again. I go, what is that? He goes, being abstract. I go, well, let's talk about it. I go, what's on your mind? And he goes, well, I'm thinking, I'm not quite sure how we bridge this scene where she's walking around and it feels like it could be too long. And I said, well, what do you think about this? Because editors and directors, we actually spend a lot of time talking. A lot of people, when they walk by the cutting room, they go, oh, they're just talking, they're not working. But we get a lot of work done just talking and delving into things. And I said to him, I go, well, here's a woman that kills her baby, it's 20 years later. I said, she's still gonna be thinking about that almost daily. I said, what if we just cut a bunch of stuff that builds up to that moment? And then he had shot the vase breaking, and it kind of cues the woman and her husband to look up. The noise cues them, something's happened upstairs. And so that's how that montage came about, that you see the baby, you see the bad husband, and the watermelon, and we accentuated all those sounds, you know? And so at the end is when the vase breaks. And once again, it echoes through the house, and that cues the daughter to come up and to get the final lesson.
That's great. I love that.
And that wasn't in the script at all. So I really, that was fun. That was a fun one to work on, create that montage.
That's true invention with the material you have, and really going above and beyond. And from what you're describing, obviously your career has been so busy and jam-packed. How did you balance work and family and coming back to work after some time off with your children? How did you balance all that, and how did you manage to come back?
Well, I decided to take like a hiatus from working as a sound editor, actually, because when I worked with Bob, I would, like on Three Women, for instance, he put me in that movie. And how I got that job was, once again, I'm walking down the hall and he looks at me, he goes, "You're Doris and you're going to Palm Springs." I go, "Okay, I don't know what that means." But the backstory to that, there's always a backstory here, is that I was living with Scotty Bushnell. We were sharing an apartment. And one morning, you know, the phone rings at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and she's on the phone for like at least 2 hours. You know, I get up, shower, I go sit down, have coffee with her. And she goes, "Well, that was Bob." I go, "Oh, really? What did he want?" He goes, "Well, he had a dream. We're doing a movie called Three Women." So that was the reference, which is crazy, right?
Love it.
So that's when he pointed to me like, "Okay, you're Doris," who was one of the spa workers. It turned out Doris was one of the spa workers. And so I went to Palm Springs, and I went to Palm Springs not only as an actress, but an assistant film editor. So I was doing double duty here. And when I was finished acting, I would help Dennis, my editor, put the dailies together. And so from that point on, then I would work in, when we got back, I transitioned to working in sound. And so then I became a sound assistant. And so one day I'm working on the show, and this great guy, another mentor, Bill Stevenson, said to me, he goes, "What are you doing?" He goes, "You know, you're a sound assistant. You're never going to get a job being an editor. You know, you know, you need to go pursue that." And I kind of looked at him. I go, "You know what? You're right." And so I said, "You know what? I got to take time off." I said, "I got to regroup and figure this out." And so that figuring out took 8 years. So I was on hiatus. I didn't have a job. You know, I decided, you know, I was having a family, and it just turned into an 8-year hold. My husband's also in the business. You know, he was a gaffer. And so he worked, and I stayed at home taking care of my 2 boys. But I did something, I guess it was intuitively, you know, and this is the advice I give to men and women who are deciding to start a family. I said, you know, every month I would call up Bill Stevenson, or I'd call up the editors that I had worked with, and I go, "Hey, you guys want to go have coffee or lunch?" And we'd spend a couple hours having, you know, coffee and lunch. And so then my husband had a really bad year. He had worked with this one cameraman, and they had a big falling out. And so my husband was out of work, and I was out of work for like a whole year. And so I said to him, I go, "Okay, I got to get back. I got to get back to work, because I'm a member of the Editors Guild, which is a union. And I was in good standing because I paid my dues. And so I called up Bill, And I said, hey, Bill Stevenson, I said, I'm looking for a job. Do you have a job? And he said to me, he goes, well, I don't have anything for at least a month. He goes, but I can't pay you much, because he was always cheap, right? And he goes, I could only pay you as an apprentice. I go, I don't care. You know, at that time, I think an apprentice is making like $700 a week, which is better than, you know, answering phones. And so that's what happened. I worked with him for like when his show came in, he honored that promise, and I worked with him. And then during that time, I was working. I went to a wedding, Raja Ghaznel's wedding, who used to be Dennis and I he was our apprentice and assistant. Well, now he's a big time, you know, director, and he was getting married. And so I saw Dennis at the reception. And where else would you meet an editor but at a bar? And so we stood there, and he goes, hey, I hear you're getting back in the business. I go, yeah. I said, why, you have a job for me? We had a really good relationship that we could bicker like that, right? And I go, why? Yeah, you're looking for an assistant? He goes, yeah, as a matter of fact. I go, oh, really? And he goes, I go, what happened to your other assistant? I said, did she find a better editor? And so he goes, yeah, she went on to greener pastures. Anyways, do you want a job? I go, yeah, I need a job. And so he hired me to do Major League. So that's how I got back as an assistant. Then I met Danny Green, because after that show, Dennis had another job. And so there was a post-production supervisor, Gloria Clark, and she was really nice. And so that job fell through, but I helped her on another job. I went over to her house and helped her with the list. I mean, it's just doing my job. And so what happened was, she had a friend named Danny Green, who was a very well-known, you know, editor. He cut Blazing Saddles, MASH, very well-established editor. And she said, oh, I have a friend who's looking for an assistant. I go, really? And she said, yeah, can I give him your name? I said, sure. And he calls me and interviews me over the phone, and I get hired by Danny Green. So I go off and I work with Danny, and, you know, God rest his soul, Danny's passed away, but he became a great mentor to me. And he was super old school, because back in the day, editors loved to go have lunch in a place where they had a bar, right?
Yep.
And so,
right, where they call it soup to go.
right. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Let's go have a lunch at a shishi place. That's what he would call it. And so we'd go to Musso and Frank's. We'd go, oh my God, we'd go all over Hollywood. But I noticed that when we'd come back, he'd sort of sit down at the couch, and then he'd have the trades. And then next thing you know, he was asleep. So this happened like the whole week. And before the end of the week, like like Wednesday or something like that, I go, great. So what am I going to do? Read the script again? So finally, one day, I knew he was just about ready to doze off. I go, listen, I go, hey, Danny, would you mind if I work on a scene? And he goes, knock yourself out, darling. And off he'd go. And so I'd work on a scene. And the only reason I asked him that was because we were working in tandem. So he'd be working on the bigger machine. I'd work on the smaller machine. And he'd go, okay, at this point, I need a close up on this actor. Okay. Off I go. I look, cut it, hand it to him. He, you know, splice it in. This would go on. He never said to me, he goes, why'd you pick that? He just put it in and then we'd play it. So I kind of knew that we were in sync. So I finally said to him, I go, okay, hey, listen, Danny, well, you know, you're relaxing. Would you mind if I work on a scene? And he goes, oh, knock yourself out, darling.
Relaxing.
Relaxing. Anyways, so I'd work on a scene. Then about 5 o'clock, I'd go tap, tap, tap. Hey, Danny, before we go home, would you mind looking at what I did today? And he'd get up and he'd look at the scene, and he'd look at it and he'd take something out and then splice it together or rearrange something. And then he goes, there. I go, oh, great, thank you. So then the next day I do the same thing. And he'd look at the scene and he goes, what's wrong with it? I go, I don't know, but it feels good. And he goes, yeah, it's great. So that was my mentorship, that I actually had a teacher there. And not one time did he look at me like, well, that's a stupid cut, or what are you thinking about? And so he became, very helpful in my transition. So
that's great, because he's giving you license to edit. You didn't have to get the job to do the editing. You were there and he was mentoring you on the, in the moment, right on site there. And it wasn't a question about, someone having to believe in you when you didn't have an editing credit. I have one more question. Do you have any advice for students, student film editors?
Well, I think the important thing is, if you're going to a school and there's a film program, volunteer to cut the master thesis for the students. Any kind of hands-on will help you in the future. And don't be afraid to tell people what your goal is, what you want to do. Because there are a lot of people, as you can tell, there are a lot of people that are willing to help you. If you stay enthusiastic, you keep out of your people's way. And the main thing is to listen and to observe, because by listening and observing the way Robert Altman worked, I was able to formulate my own style of editing. And I think that there's so many opportunities now for people to do what we do. And if you can't go to a school, just look in the want ads, because I'm sure that in the want ads, they're, industrials, films are really in demand too, because that Microsoft and my son, who is an editor, he did a lot of promos for Microsoft. Now, you never would think that Microsoft or Google or Yahoo would have that kind of department, or any major like Procter and Gamble. I mean, those places, I think, and even in the well, I don't want to suggest anybody join the army, but those areas have film editing because they want to do recruiting films. And I know that some of the older editors, that's how they got their start, was editing recruiting films for Second World War. And but I think you just need to keep your goal in mind and don't let anybody discourage you, because I think that part of it is that they're just jealous that they don't have the guts to do what you want to do. And that, happened like in a reunion where high school reunion, where one of the most popular boys when I was going to school came up to me and said to me, goes, I'm really jealous of you. And I go, why? And he goes, because you went and did what you wanted to do. And if a woman that grew up in Vancouver's Chinatown, can do what I'm doing now, then anybody can do it.
And I would say just always be open, always be learning, continue to meet people who are following the path that you want to meet, and like you said, go for it. So.
And I think, Jody, part of it too is networking. If you go to school and you meet a couple people you really are in sync with, well, then they'll know 2 more people, and those people would know 4 more people. And so I always suggest that to new members in the Editors Guild, when they ask, how do I become an editor? Well, that's what you do, is you find all these people. That's why people that go to universities do so well, like Barry Jenkins and Joy McMillian, who used to be my assistant. They all went to Florida State. So there is a group of support. So if anybody needs a job, they know somebody that will turn you on to a job.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, just keep that, keep your eye on the prize. That's
Right.
what I say.
Eye on the prize. Well, Maisie, thank you so much for generously sharing your insights and inspiration through your rich stories, your diverse experiences, your deep wisdom. And it's really been great to get to know you actually better. And I applaud that you're opening up the world of film editing to so many people, and especially to our students in Kenya. Thank you so much. Thank you for participating in the Academy's Visiting Artists Film Series, FilmAid Edition for film editing.